Welcome to lesson 3. We're going to talk about ketogenic diets because this is something that inevitably comes up in the world of nutritional coaching, and for good reason. There is a surprisingly large segment of the general population who gets exposed to the concept of ketogenic diets, and a lot of them have actually engaged in ketogenic dieting. And a certain segment of the public is very adamant about the universal superiority of ketogenic dieting. And so I'm sure you've seen a lot of that happen on social media with comments and various gurus here and there, where they essentially brand themselves as like the keto guru even. In any case, it's important to understand the science and the research and the evidence base behind the claims surrounding ketogenic diets. And that's what we are going to do right now. So, a common claim is that keto adaptation, which is defined as a physiological shift towards increased fat oxidation and decreased glycogen utilization, happens to be a supposed special metabolic state that results in superior fat loss. So the proponents of ketogenic dieting for fat loss will commonly claim that it takes several months to really become fat adapted, to become keto adapted. So you're in this special metabolic state where you're an, in quotes, fat burning machine. So let's talk about the whole fat burning machine thing. Yes, you are oxidizing more fat when you are on a ketogenic diet. But that is mainly a reflection of the increase in dietary fat. So there's a lot of fat that is a lot more fat that's coursing through your digestive tract and into circulation. And, in addition to an increased concentration of circulating free fatty acids as a result of being on a high fat diet, you also have a higher concentration of intramuscular fat. And so fatty acid oxidation levels will go up when you're on a ketogenic diet, and you will become an, in quotes, fat burning machine. But the fat that you're burning at an increased rate is not necessarily body fat. A lot of it's just dietary fat and the result of having a high fat diet on substrate utilization. So you're not becoming a fat burning machine because it's like melting off your love handles. You are a fat burning machine on a ketogenic diet because of the high fat intake and the high fat presence within the body as a result of that intake. Oh, and by the way, yeah, defining a ketogenic diet. So that you can reach elevated levels of ketone production with a diet that contains a maximum of about 50 grams of carbohydrate a day or less. And whenever circulating blood levels of ketones reach 0.5 millimoles per liter and up-ish, then that can be considered a state of what's called nutritional ketosis. Okay, so speaking of fat adaptation, so we can define fat adaptation as the increase in fatty acid oxidation, increase in lipolysis, decrease in glycogen utilization, maximal levels of blood ketones. So the time course that this happens is sooner than people presume. So when you get on a ketogenic diet, you reach a maximal level of blood ketones in about 2 weeks on the diet. Okay, so that's one aspect of becoming keto adapted, is a maximally elevated level of circulating ketones that typically occurs within 2 weeks. So there's that. And then the elevation in fat oxidation. This is indicated by, over here, this is on the y-axis here, we've got the change in respiratory quotient. So when respiratory quotient drops, that means an increase in fat oxidation has happened. So there is a plateau or a maximal increase in fat oxidation that occurs in about a week. So at about day 7, you have maximally elevated levels of fat oxidation. So here we are, like at the two concrete and objective markers of keto adaptation are maximal circulating levels of ketones and maximum levels of fat oxidation, all occurring within 1 to 2 weeks of being on the ketogenic diet. Just put an indicator there to punctuate it. Before I talk about this, okay, the point I wanted to make with these past 2 slides is that there's a series of studies in the literature showing that ketogenic diets don't perform significantly better than non-ketogenic diets when protein and calorie intakes are matched between the diets. And this is something that I discussed in a previous module. But a lot of the excuses that are made for why the ketogenic diet didn't perform magically superiorly is because of the concept that it takes many months to become keto adapted or fat adapted, when in reality, the objective measures of keto adaptation occur within 1 to 2 weeks of being on the ketogenic diet. So that's the point I wanted to make with these previous 2 slides. This next slide is a fun one because this is a study by Andrew Chappell and colleagues. And what they did was they documented the nutrient intakes of elite level natural bodybuilders who made the top 5 placings versus elite level natties who did not place. And so they documented everything. So what I want you to take a look at in particular are the carbohydrate intakes. Let's first look at the men who placed. So they consumed, and here, this is start of prep and end of prep. So at the start of the prep, they consumed 5.1 grams per kilogram of body weight with carbohydrate. And at the end of prep, they were still high at 4.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. So that at the start of their contest prep, they were taking in 434 grams of carbs. And at the end of contest prep, they're at 340 grams of carbs a day. That is far higher than the 50 grams a day limit that would constitute a ketogenic diet. Okay, now for the women, their carbohydrate intakes at the beginning of prep were 3.7 grams per kilogram of body weight, or 243 grams a day. And at the end of prep, it's 3.5 grams per kilogram of body weight, which translated to an absolute value of 196.7 grams of carbohydrate per day. That's still 4 times the amount that would constitute a ketogenic diet. Keep in mind that this population, natural competitive bodybuilders, one of their objectives is to get as lean as humanly possible without dying. Their goal is to look like an absolute anatomy chart with translucent skin where you can see every little striation. So if keto was the absolute ticket to getting as lean as possible, then this population who has the most to lose and the most at stake riding on the line to choose whatever diet it takes to get the lean as possible would be on keto. But they're not, and they're still getting incredibly lean. So the point of this slide is to just build some awareness that it does come down to a caloric deficit when you want to push fat loss, when you want to push the envelope of fat loss. And it's not about restricting carbs per se. Carbs are not the barrier to ultimate leanness. And in fact, it's demonstrated by this population that even a relatively high amount of carbs running all the way up until contest day results in extreme levels of leanness. And this is not to say that in the general population that keto diets can work just fine for the goals of the general population. But it has to be made clear that there's nothing particularly magic about the ketogenic diet that will enable people to reach an ultimate or envelope pushing level of leanness. You have to individualize it. There is a wide spectrum of carb and fat proportions that work similarly well, especially in the general public. That will comprise the majority of our clients. So it's perfectly fine for people to go super low carb, like low carb keto, and it's perfectly fine for them to be high carbing as well, as long as we know that the objective is to make sure that net caloric deficit is in place week to week, and then they will lose fat. I'll speak more about this on the next module, but whenever you set a program, a good thing to do is just like ride out the program that you set for 4-week blocks, and then assess at the end of the 4 weeks what kind of progress has been made. And then you can always make adjustments at those assessment points. You don't have to figure, okay, we're going to get this client on this plan, and by golly, it better work. It better get them to their ultimate goal. No. You want to be able to write out a plan, because it is a systematic form of trial and error whenever you're working with somebody, and even with yourself to a large degree. And you just ride out the imposed caloric deficit for a 4-week period, and then assess after that 4 weeks. And of course, along the way, you'll have, in most cases, you'll have weekly checkpoints, but the big assessment and decision point about potentially changing the program would be in 4-week blocks. And that is not a hard core set in stone rule either. I'm working with somebody right now where we've been writing out a plateau that has been a very kind of slow grind. We're pushing the envelope, and her observation periods are 4 to 8 weeks, depending on where we're at. Okay, so this slide is a flex, I would admit. There's Stone Cold Steve Austin there at the bottom left. For some of you guys who are in my age bracket, you'll recognize him. And there's Derek Fisher over here, Pete Sampras. There's Carla Fisher, and then Kelechi Opara, Stevens, Scott Perry, and there's the glue goddess over there. AKA that was her nickname there. That was Kelly Davis. These folks are, and I'll use a couple of them as an example. They're a study in individualization and kind of drastically different carbohydrate requirements. So Brandon Stevens over here had him on 600 grams of carbs a day, barely keep weight on him. With Steve Austin, he had a goal of weight loss and getting lean. We had to take his carbs below 200 grams a day in order to make a dent. So individuals will vary in their response to the amount of carbs that you program in. And so a lot of working with clients, like I said, is a systematic trial and error and adjustment to find out. And with that, we've ended the lesson, and I will see you back on lesson 4, where we talk about meal timing and distribution.